Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Trial and Error. I'm Austin.
And I'm Emma Grace. And before we get into our topic today, I just want to let everyone know to go over to our Instagram and ask us questions, because our next episode is going to be a Q&A episode. So we need your questions to make it fun. And we're also going to be reacting to the poll that we did, this or that, concerning law school finals. So head on over there and give us some questions. They can be personal, they can be law school, they can be philosophical, theological. We'll do it all.
So today we're going to be debriefing our finals and talking about what they're like in law school versus in undergrad and how studying is different and a couple different other things.
So first off, we're just going to talk about what finals are like in law school compared to our undergrad experience. Austin's going to go first and try to recall his undergrad experience, because apparently it is a black hole in his brain.
I don't know. I feel like I forget what finals are almost immediately after they happen. Like, I wrote down what I knew, so I don't need to remember it anymore. I'll look back and relearn it when it's relevant. And in undergrad, I was the same way. I feel like most of my undergrad classes were paper-oriented instead of final-oriented, and the classes were also significantly easier. So I didn't spend that much time studying for my finals in undergrad, like maybe 3 hours the day before.
I, on the other hand, did spend a lot of time studying, but it was a little bit different. It was kind of baby steps towards law school. How our professors would do it is typically they would give us a packet of just words of terms that we've learned throughout the semester that could be on the final. Not all of it's going to be, but it basically walked you through the entire class. By the end, it would be like a good 30 pages of material. And then honestly, just going through it is what taught me the material and helped me remember it. And it was obviously a lot easier to remember because it wasn't as complex as the law, but it's kind of a baby step towards how you study in law school, which was really beneficial for me. And then I also actually had a couple classes that worked with the law school where they would give us past finals that had been published, but they were take home for us. So I would take an actual law school final, but it would be open book, open note, and I'd have a week to do it. So it was kind of taking me through the steps of law school. So thankfully I had a lot of law school prep going into finals, but Austin still did better than me. So it's not like it helps that much, but if you're someone like me that you want to anticipate it, I highly recommend trying to do something like that.
I'll also add that I wasn't really trying that hard in undergrad. Like, I was just there because it was the right thing to do. There's a reason I randomly chose to go to law school. It's because I didn't really have a good career trajectory going forward. And that wasn't because my grades were bad. I had like a 3.7 or so in undergrad, but I just wasn't trying to be stellar. Like, if I was, I probably could have gotten into a better school, but I didn't know I was going to grad school, so I didn't really care.
Honestly, I think that's probably a good thing, because burnout can happen really easily. Like, we were talking about how this semester was so much harder just because we had done the last semester, and then this semester we were also job searching, and that kind of impacted our experience with finals. So maybe it's a better thing that you didn't go super hard, because now you have so much energy. You're a young, studious man.
Yeah, I will say I took 1 year off between undergrad and law school, and I think that was really helpful because it made me like excited about school again versus just like going to work and doing 80% of the same thing every week and only having a couple new challenges, versus actually continuing to do new things all the time like you do in law school.
Same. I absolutely loved my gap year. So we've kind of foreshadowed this, but we're going to talk a little bit about what law school studying is like and how it's different. There are some things that me and Austin do the same, and there are some things that we do differently. So Austin's going to talk first a little bit about what he does, and I'll compare and contrast my experience to his.
I feel like I have a relatively unique way of studying. I hang out with people who have different professors for the same classes. Emma Grace and I are in different sections, and we have different professors, and a lot of my friends are in Emma Grace's classes. So what I do is hear them talk about stuff and fit it into the mental model that I have, and decide whether or not what they're doing is relevant for what my professor wants. And that helps me get like a more comprehensive picture of the course, because I'm not getting it from just one perspective, but also I'm able to focus it towards my professor. And then regarding actual studying, I tried to take notes throughout the semester. I changed my note-taking method this semester and used a different app, and I don't think it worked out that well. I wish I had just stuck to Google Docs and was taking notes in every class.
Wait, is this the thing that you have that's like the little web?
Yeah, so I use an app called Obsidian. It lets you put things together using different tags and stuff, so that way they like all interconnect so you can see those and how the different things interact between like classes. I'm sure it's good and actually better for like long-term knowledge retention.
And studying for the bar.
What I did was having the judge for a certain case written down every time, and the year that it happened, and the district that it happened in, so that way I knew, oh, this court leans this way, and these judges had an outsized impact. Like Judge Cardozo's is someone you'll hear a lot about and read quite a few of his things, and then the different Supreme Court justices. So I think it does help with like a bigger picture thing, but it doesn't help with finals because you have too much in too many different spots, and it's hard to bring it all together at the end. Like I was looking for notes as much as I was like reading them.
Yeah, it's hard to know the balance, especially in class with taking notes, paying attention versus writing it down, because I promise you're not going to remember it next month if you don't write it down, but you don't want to write down too much and miss the kinds of questions the professor is asking students, because that really helps know what they're going to be asking on the final.
I think I wrote less than 50 words of notes for most classes.
I definitely wrote more than that, but I honestly am not shocked by that, Austin saying that, and I think that is a good study method for some people to just be like a really active listener, and I know that Austin's pretty active as far as raising his hand in class and really engaging, so I think that was more beneficial for him. For me, I write a lot, and I have an iPad and I handwrite because handwriting helps me remember, but I don't write down everything the professor says. Like if we're going over a case I read, well, I already have the fact pattern book briefed and all that, so I'm more taking the rules and what the professor's emphasizing, and I also like to write down the questions, like I said, that the professor's asking, because those help know what the professor's trying to get us to look at when it comes to the cases. But yeah, I'll say that overall I probably have 20 to 30 pages of notes for an entire semester. These are notability notes. So I mean, that's probably like 40 pages of like normal journaled notes, maybe less actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because I have small handwriting. I don't know. Point is it's not a ton either for me.
My approach, and this goes back to hanging out with people in different sections, is to get like just the vibe of the course for most of the semester, and then spend the last month or so actually learning the specifics and like the specific rules, and making sure I have all the rules as the professor wants them. Because honestly, I only care about grades to the extent that they help me get a better job. I care about learning more than the actual grade for every other purpose than getting a future employment. So I'm just trying to, like, I ask questions that don't necessarily have to do with what will be on the exam, but are like one step removed from the content.
Yeah, it helps you remember and actually learn. That we're paying a lot of money to learn, so might as well ask those questions. Why don't you explain a little bit of what outlining is?
Yeah, so outlining is basically just a glorified term for making your own study guide. Like Emma Grace was saying, in undergrad, your professors will often give you the study guide, and sometimes there will be blanks that you have to fill in because they want you to look at it. But outlining, what I do is I just take the syllabus as like overall headers, and then write out all the relevant rules underneath that header, and then write the cases and what like a 2-sentence takeaway is. I'll write like a 3 to 5 word blurb about what the case is about, so that way it's easier to remember. But basically you're just trying, especially for open note courses, to make something that you can reference if you know something exists, but you forget exactly how it's worded or exactly where it was.
Absolutely, yeah. It's basically just condensing the whole course. A great example is we'll sometimes go over as many as 5 or 6 cases in one class, but 3 of them are basically saying the same thing, just giving different fact patterns for you to understand how it would apply differently. So you can really consolidate those 5 cases into 2-3 sentences that's the takeaway from the case. Because a lot of what you're doing in class is thinking on your feet and engaging with the professor and like learning how the law works. But honestly, I feel like the finals are more geared to, do you understand the rule and can you apply the rule? It's less like, why do we have this rule to begin with? And it's less of, what do you think the plaintiff was actually thinking in this case? Those are more rhetorical questions that maybe we would acknowledge in class, but they don't need to go on your outline. Outlining is notorious to be a specifically law school thing. Me and Austin were laughing earlier because it really is a glorified study guide, but you can buy them online. I don't necessarily recommend doing that. For our school, we have a database. If you've gotten like a 3.7 or higher, you can put your outline into this database for people to use. I've never used them, but Austin has, and I think he's had good luck reviewing that after making his own outline and just kind of combining things and taking certain things. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'll say the biggest difference for everybody is when you outline. Do you outline as you go? Do you do it all at the very end and cram it in? Do you do it, at the end of each unit? Is there a natural place to do it in your class? And everyone is different. So I'll let Austin talk a little bit first about how he does that.
Honestly, I appreciate the classes that have spots where you should. Midterms are a great example of that. So for civil procedure this semester, we had 2 essays that weren't graded, but we were supposed to turn in to get feedback on. So they made me keep up with the respective subject matters underneath both of those, so that my outline was being made not too far after I learned it. My general approach is to take my class notes, I book brief, and what that is just highlighting, typically in different colors, different important information from each case. So you'll have the procedural history in one color, the facts of the case in another, the legal reasoning in another, and then the final holding in another color. So I'll do that, and then I'll just go through my highlights and write them down into my outline. And then I'll look at one of those third-party outlines. And from there, what I'll do is combine the 2 of them into one pretty long one, probably 70 or 80 pages on a Google Doc, and then take that and try and shorten it down as much as possible. I usually try and get it 1 page front and back, because even if it is an open everything test, you want to be able to reference things quickly.
So is this something that you're doing the last month of school, or?
Yeah, so that combination and then shortening is usually in the last month, but I book brief as I read. I read every case. I think that's something that not everyone does. There are online.
So there are things like Quimpy, or maybe Oyez, because it's a free one and a not very good one, but you get what you can take. They're study aids, I would call them probably.
Yeah, so there are these study aids that will basically give you a brief, but it's not oriented towards what specifically you're learning. It takes the whole case instead of the excerpt that your book ends up actually using to teach the content. So those are helpful to read before you read the case. Or another thing I'll do is, if I just don't understand what's going on factually in a case, use it so I can get a narrative that I'm placing things into. So I'll do all the book briefing throughout the course of the semester. And then the last month or so, even 2 weeks sometimes before classes end, I'll start that aggregation process, and then I'll shorten them down to 1 a couple of days before that exam.
And why outlining is so important is, in law school, I think a final has been worth 70% of my grade or higher. And often it's 90 to 100% of our grade. So you want to outline, because it's not we're talking about midterms, and some classes have quizzes so that you can kind of check in with yourself as you go, but those aren't worth very much. A lot of professors say the midterm, if you even have one, is enough to have some skin in the game. You need to study for it, but it's not going to completely destroy your grade if you do badly. And it's just it's honestly a nice thing for professors to do, because they're trying to show you how they test before it's worth 100% of your grade. But a lot of schools just do 100% of your grade. So outlining is really important for that. Some classes are open book during the final. Some are closed book. Open book has a lot of variations. I'd say the most common is that you can bring your outline and materials like that, but it's not open internet. There are some cases where it actually is open internet, but again, a big thing about finals in law school is it is a race against the clock, because the bar is going to be a race against the clock. So they're trying to put us in an atmosphere like the bar, and so it's yeah, you have time to Google, but maybe some are easier to Google during than others. What I do is I look at my notes, my briefs, and then if there's any PowerPoints or anything, and I slowly work through each subject matter outlining. Last semester I outlined throughout the semester. This semester I outlined at spring break, midterms, and then finals, and it actually worked a lot better for me. They advise you your first semester to outline as you go, and maybe that works for some people, but I honestly just forgot it and had to redo it all over again. And for me, why this works and why I just want to outline at the end is the last thing I do, similar to Austin, I make a flow chart. So I do if it's this rule, then go to this analysis. If it's this, go to this analysis, to help me systematically hit each issue and each rule within the issue during the test. And that, I think, really helped me this semester. I sort of did that last semester, but the problem is, last semester, I would outline, get together with my study group, and we'd all go through our outlines. And I think that just confused me, and I added things I didn't need, or maybe took away things that I did need. As to where this semester, we flow charted together. And so I feel like that helped a lot, comparing flow charts rather than outlines, to help have a systematic analysis where you're not forgetting anything. And I honestly feel a lot more confident this semester. But I know a lot of people are really tired this semester, so I'm in a minority boat on feeling confident.
When I'm shortening my outlines to that 1 or 2 pages, I'm not making a flow chart, I'm making a checklist. But basically, I'm like, okay, here's what we actually learned this semester and what's going to be on like the professor's rubric. I'll do top level topic and then every question you should ask on the way down. Then every question you should ask under each one. Because one, that helps you like organize your thoughts when you're actually writing. And two, it gives you, like, you took the time to understand what the professor probably thinks is important. So if you hit all those things, you're probably going to do pretty well.
Yeah, and finals in law school, there are multiple choice sometimes, and sometimes they're worth a lot. But I think most commonly, the essays is where you get hit. And it's so funny. I had this one professor, he's like, yeah, you just state the issue, you state the rule, and you say it could go this way or that way, and you're done. I'm like, oh, that's so easy. And then I get the test, and I'm like, holy cow, there's 40 issues within one issue. How do I organize this? So half the battle is organizing, and you don't want to take your time to sit there and outline everything because you might not get it done. So you want to kind of have an outline that can work with the test. And along that same note, a lot of professors at our school have previous tests in a database, and that really helps you know how the test is going to flow. And I highly recommend taking a look at those. Me and Austin have slightly different approaches, I think, when it comes to those tests, which we'll talk about now. But for me, last semester, I did a lot of them. Like, I actually took them and then looked at review answers if there were any. But I think it tripped me up slightly because I got my expectations set that the final we were going to get is like the finals they've been doing the past freaking 15 years, but apparently not. Apparently we're a test group because a lot of our finals were so different from the finals that I was ready for and that my outline was geared towards. And so this semester, it's kind of crazy. I'll be honest with you all and tell you how I did when I know, but I actually did not take any practice tests for this final season. And we will see if that worked for me or if that was a horrible choice.
I will say, even if you don't take the practice tests, look at the rubrics or the sample answers or whatever your professor...
Yes, I did that. I looked at the sample answers. I'm not completely crazy, but I didn't take them.
And then, so, again, part of that checklist thing, I'll also have, like, a couple pages where I have pre-written sentences where it's like, okay, I'll write pre-written answers where it's like, okay, here's the rule, and then I'll put like, it could go this way because ... it could go the other way because ... and then conclusion will be like just a statement about the rule. So it's like, this statement is not defamatory as like my overall conclusion. So that way I have paragraphs already, like I have a little bit of the muscle memory of writing those. So it just helps you be in the flow when you're going.
Yeah, for sure. I don't necessarily do answers like that, but I think that's a really great idea. The difference between me and Austin is a lot of mine were a lot more limited as far as open book or completely closed, which changes our approaches, right? Because my friend Ivy, shout out to Ivy, would make Quizlets for certain things that I would just have to memorize verbatim. And so of course I'm using Quizlets. I'm studying with friends when it comes to like memorizing the material. I think in undergrad I did a lot more memorizing material than in law school, but in law school for me, because I did have so much closed book, it was still really important. And then obviously using different study aids also really helps too when it comes to memorization. Maybe those definitions help you a little bit more. I wouldn't use this on the test if it's not the definition your professor gave you, but just to help you orient yourself to the material. And then of course, Austin mentioned this, but the rubric is so important to know. Every professor is going to test you differently. And they're going to tell you, they're going to be honest with you how they're testing. They're going to tell you how many points is worth what. We both had this one professor that he would have like usually about 3 essay questions. One would take 40 minutes. One would take 10, one would take 30, and you have an hour to take the exam. Well, you're screwed if you actually do everything that you need to do on that first one because they're all worth equal points. So it's actually kind of worth doing the longest one maybe at the end. Well, I will not say that. It actually depends on the rules, but I'm not going to get that nitty-gritty into it. But my point is that some professors like will weight essay questions differently, but if they're all equal, you need to answer them all, or that will hit your grade even if you did a really good job in everything you were supposed to.
Yeah, and then we have another professor who I barely answered half the question for the second half, but she, every time you just said something right, would like give you a little tick mark, and then she would compare the tick marks at the end. But I ended up with a 3.9 in the class.
It's really depending on the professor, and they'll tell you what they're looking for, and they'll answer questions and be honest. And for us, like the cover page of the final explains the point system and how much time you'll have. Another thing is like multiple choice might be like a little bit of your grade, or it might be as equally weighted as the essay. So it's like, wow, you really need to nail down multiple choice for this professor. So it's very professor dependent, but this episode is really geared towards our trial and errors, if you will. And I think the biggest mistake I made last semester is redoing my whole outline at the end, not studying my flow chart with my friends, but studying my outline and really gripping that outline as my holy grail, and then completely blanking from the nerves. I am a nervous test taker. I do not test well. I'd like to think that I'm smarter than what my test grades show, but maybe not. But regardless, if you're like me and you're an anxious test taker, I highly suggest a flow chart and practice tests to help you out. But don't, again, I was hanging on too tightly to those practice tests, and when the tests I got weren't anything like the practice tests, I like freaked out and I honestly blacked out. I don't remember what happened, but obviously not anything good because my grades were aight. But my point is that was my biggest mistake, and my biggest piece of advice is don't just outline. Outlining is great, but you need to figure out how to outline for you, and you need to figure out how to condense that baby to take it in with you if you're allowed to. And if not, you have to figure out how to memorize it and study it. And that might be practice tests, or that might be a Quizlet.
Yeah, I'll add, I did have a couple like closed tests, but I didn't spend much time just like memorizing things. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a vibey person when it comes to knowledge, but I would just be like, oh, this is talking about this thing, so I'm going to have like, I guess, a checklist in my head, but I don't memorize that. I'm like, I wrote it down on my outline, so I should remember it.
Yeah, and Austin's totally right. I think for me, when the memorization came in, I had 2 different professors really appreciate case names. Like half the points were from remembering the case name and the facts of the case and distinguishing it from our case. And with that, you have to just, you read 50 cases that semester, so you have to know them all and be ready for any of them to be on the test. That's where the memorization came in for me. I feel like even without memorizing, I could be like, oh, this is kind of like that case, but I might forget the rule of that case or something if I don't study it further. Do you have any last thoughts of like a mistake you made or the biggest piece of advice you have?
I think just like be consistent with what you're doing throughout the semester. Like, don't try and change things, especially when you're first starting. Come in with a game plan. I read a book called Law School Confidential, and that like helped me know what I was planning on doing going in. So I book briefed the whole semester, basically, since I've come into law school. And some people will be against that, but the worst advice is to do full outline brief style things for a month and then decide, oh, this is too much work, I'm going to start book briefing. Because then you're throwing yourself off. You're going to miss a couple of things as you're transitioning from one to the other. So just being consistent with your study plan.
Yeah, and if you find out that you kind of do need to transition, I highly recommend going to your professors. Like Cornette was saying in our last episode, the great thing about law school now is professors are really there for you. And if you're like, this is not working for their class, even though they recommended it, just go up to them and talk to them about it. I have professors that have told me, oh, well, maybe try this, or, oh, yeah, a lot of students do this and do well. And that was life-changing for me. So don't be scared of change as long as you are being guided by professors while you do it.
You have any final thoughts?
Peace and love to anyone that takes a 1L final. You will be fine. You might black out. My favorite is afterwards, people will talk about the final. I'm like, I don't remember that. And that actually is probably my last piece of advice. Before the final and after the final, you need to figure out if you're the kind of person it helps you to talk about it or if it helps you to get in the zone. For me, headphones in, I don't want to talk about the final. I don't want people to ask me questions and trip me up if I can't remember it right before the final. And then after the final, I don't want to find out what I did wrong. I just want to leave. But some people, it brings them a lot of comfort to talk it out. That is not me. I would find out quickly if that is you or not, if you're like me and you're an anxious test taker, because it will change the game in law school. And study with smart people like Austin. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for tuning in on this episode that's all about finals. I know for some of you, this is a little bit triggering considering we just finished, but I thought it'd be great to do this episode while it's fresh on our brains, and hopefully it gave you something to think about, whether you are about to do finals, you've done finals, but you have more to do, or you're just curious about what law school's like.
Don't forget to send us any questions you have for our upcoming Q&A episode.
Please. And they can also be for our cats. I'll try to get them to answer. Miss Tobeans and Cleo. He thinks I'm kidding, but I'm not. I will ask.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Trial and Error.
And we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.